happy to welcome you to the kickoff for our 2024 season about the USS Midway Museum. First, let me just start by asking everybody to please mute or silence their iPhones. And I also want to just alert you to mark your calendars for our next presentation in February. On February the 10th, we will be hosting Javier Gonzalez Meeks, history professor at Grossmont College. His subject will be Behind the Mask, the historical Zorro and Mexican-American experience in early California. Keep that in mind. Our guests today, we're happy to welcome Steve Walker and Brian Butler. And I apologize to Steve again. Somehow his name got messed up on the notice that we put out. But I'm happy to straighten that out. Steve Walker and Brian Butler, proud U.S. Navy veterans and active docents at the USS Midway Aircraft Carrier Museum. Brian arrived in San Diego as a 22-year-old Navy ensign back in 1968 and was deployed to the Western Pacific on two San Diego-based aircraft carriers, the USS Kearsarge and the USS Ticonderoga. When his 3-year commitment was completed, he earned a master's degree from San Diego State and worked for numerous San Diego area companies in marketing communications over the past 4 decades. He's been a docent volunteer at the Midway for more than 8 years. Steve Walker served as a naval aviator for 23 years of combined active and reserve duty and retired as a captain in the Navy Reserves. He has more than 4,300 flight hours, mostly in the A-4 fighter bomber, and then he was a commercial pilot for 28 years, racking up over 15,000 flight hours around the world, working beginning first for Western Airlines and then Delta Airlines. He retired from Delta in 2005. Today he teaches aviation online for Embry-Riddle University. He's been a Midway docent for more than 12 years. And we couldn't find two better people to tell us about the Midway and its role as both an active Navy carrier and then as a museum. I'm happy to welcome Steve Walker and Brian Butler.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you all for being here today. Vince reminds me it's been 5 years since we've been here. Have any of you heard this presentation before? Okay, we've got turnover. Anyways, welcome. Thanks for having us. Steve and I are two of over 750 active volunteers at the Midway. The Midway is, in fact, a very uniquely run organization. The volunteers run the place. There's only about 100 employees at the Midway, 750 volunteers, so that is really unique among museums. Now, we know that most of you San Diegans have been to the Midway before. Our goal today is to show you some things that you don't know. There's quite a bit that's going on at the Midway as we speak. I like to tell people that the Midway is unique in 2 different ways. It's a lesson in both in history and in technology. Technology, how did the big hunk of metal function? How did it drive through the ocean? How did it launch and land airplanes? How did it take care of the needs of 4,500 sailors all day, every day? But to me, the other thing that's also really interesting is the Midway's history. So to really get the impact of the Midway, you've got to know both those two different ways. We call our presentation Then and Now. And by the way, we want to address a lot of questions at the end, so please be thinking about those and hold them until we're done. The Midway has a mission statement. Key words are preserving, legacy, inspire, and educate, entertain, and some core values. Volunteers, guest experience, community resource, and culture. Go ahead, Steve. So in part 1, I'm going to talk a little bit about the highlights of this rather incredible 47-year-old aircraft carrier. That's how long it served, 47 years. It was the longest serving U.S. Navy aircraft carrier during the 20th century. Over 200,000 sailors called the Midway home during its 47 years. She was known for numerous naval aviation breakthroughs. but she also went on a couple of very historic humanitarian missions, and we're going to talk about that. And by the way, here she is at her christening. Here she is at her christening, September 10th, 1945. Wow. I have to tell people, the Midway is one of the few things I can point to in my life that's older than me. By a lot, she's older than me. Go to cigar with the people there in Newport News, Virginia, as the Midway was christened. So then in part, yes, and then in part two, Steve is going to tell you about the Midway today, what's going on, what are the key things. Now, to really appreciate the Midway, I've got to back you up in time. I've got to give you a little bit of a history lesson. This is an atoll in the Pacific Ocean, known as Midway. It is a long way from here. 3,500 miles northwest of San Diego is Midway Atoll. In fact, it's 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. It's way out there. The Midway, the ship, did not participate at the Battle of Midway. In fact, it had not even been built then. But most historians agree that the Battle of Midway, June 1942, was the historic, pivotal battle in World War II in the Pacific War specifically. The U.S. Navy was outgunned, it was outmanned. The Imperial Japanese Navy brought 353 ships to Midway into that portion of the world, and they were out. The U.S. Navy only had about 230 ships at that time. The U.S. Navy had absolutely no business winning the Battle of Midway, but they really did win because of a lot of things: extraordinary leadership, heroism, and frankly, some just plain damn good luck. So I'm going to back you up a little further. To really understand what happened at Midway, I've got to take you back to Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Navy had figured out through some very smart people called cryptologists, that's a fancy word for code breakers. They knew that the Japanese were on the move when Pearl Harbor came about, but they didn't know where they were going. They thought they were going to Southeast Asia. They were in fact going to Southeast Asia, but they did not know that they were coming to Midway. But the backstory is the Japanese made 4 very crucial mistakes at Pearl Harbor. It was a smashing victory for the Imperial Japanese Navy. As you well know, they sunk numerous capital ships of the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor. But they assumed that their communications, their code was code. It hadn't been broken. During the course of time between December 41 and June of 1942, the cryptologists broke the Japanese naval code called JPN 25. They broke the code, and they figured out not only that the Japanese were coming to Midway, but they figured out what day they were coming, what course they were going to come down, and what time they were, basically within a half an hour, what time they were going to arrive. The other mistakes they made at Pearl Harbor were this. There were, if you've been to Pearl Harbor, been to the Arizona Memorial, and you think around that big punch bowl area, you look around, there's fuel tanks that ring that whole area around. What's it called? Fuel tanks. The Japanese missed those fuel tanks. They thought about going back to get them, but they decided not to do that. But the other thing that they missed was they missed the United States Navy's aircraft carriers. The United States Navy aircraft carriers played a crucial role in the Battle of Midway. The Japanese also did another kind of strange thing. They divided their forces. They also took a portion of their force, of the 300 ships, and they took them north to Alaska, to the Aleutian Islands, where they invaded 2 Aleutian Islands in the Aleutian chain and took control of those. And they also had their invasion force. They were going to invade Midway, not just attack it. That was strung out hundreds of miles behind the attack force. That ended up also being a mistake on their part. And one more mistake. They had their submarines. They had a large submarine fleet. They were trying to scout for the American aircraft carriers because they knew they missed in Pearl Harbor. They were scouting for the American aircraft carriers. And unfortunately for them, they never got where they wanted to be to scout for the aircraft carriers. So they missed the aircraft carriers. They did not know where the aircraft carriers were. In fact, they thought the U.S. Navy only had 1 aircraft carrier left, when in fact they had 3. So as a result, at the Battle of Midway, the U.S. Navy, through all this combination of good fortune, sunk 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in the course of one day. 4 of them. And more than that, over 240 Japanese pilots and aircrew perished at Midway. The Japanese never recovered from the loss of those very experienced troops. Unlike the U.S. Navy, which trains new people all the time with combat veterans, they didn't go in and train. The Japanese just didn't do it that way. They just never really had to utilize their people to train other people. And so when they lost all those pilots and those air crews, it really made a big difference later on in the war. So, a year later in 1943, the Navy decided, because of the significance of the Battle of Midway, they decided to name the unbuilt aircraft carrier after the Battle of Midway, and such the Midway got her name. Okay, let's move on. So here we have this brand new aircraft carrier. The war's over. Navy found their way. This photograph in Midway's initial configuration. Take a look at the configuration of the ship. As you're going to see here in a minute, the Midway changed a lot. She had a lot of work done. This picture was taken in the Atlantic, off the coast of Virginia, probably in early 1946. The Midway was built in just 18 months, and she was built for chump change, $86 million. I think there's garages over here in the trails that are listing for $86 million. $86 million, that's chump change. Today, it takes 10 to 12 years to build an aircraft carrier, and the price tag now is, ready for this, folks, about $10 billion per copy. They are still, the U.S. Navy is still building aircraft carriers, not many, just here and there, they're building them. She was the first of three classes of the Midway class, three ships of the Midway class. There were three built that were built just like this one right after Midway. One was named the Coral Sea, the other one was the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Next, please. So, the war is over. Midway, the Navy found a way, first with Operation Frostbite in the left-hand picture. That is indeed snow on the deck of the Midway when she was in the Arctic Circle testing what was going to happen to aircraft in highly inclement weather and climate, such as the Arctic Circle. They also experimented with something that never happened called a watertight flight suit, and they also were working on a new invention called the helicopter. The helicopter became very important in the U.S. Navy's aviation repertoire. The next year they tried something even more bizarre, Operation Sandy, testing the feasibility of launching a long-range missile off the flight deck. That did not work out very well. They didn't do that. As you know, missiles became something that came into Cape Canaveral, later Cape Kennedy in the 1950s. But there was a beginning here for the U.S. Navy's Tomahawk missile program. The missile program became a big part of the Navy and aviation. Next, please, Steve. 1947 to 53, the Midway truly went to work. She was deployed to the Mediterranean 7 times during the period of the Korean War. Midway did not participate actively in the Korean War. She was deployed to the Mediterranean 7 times during the war. It also was the advent of the first jet aircraft on an aircraft carrier. This is called the F-9 Panther. The F-9 was the first carrier jet which forever changed naval aviation. Next, please. In 1954, the Midway truly became a Pacific fleet. She transited around through the Atlantic, underneath the coast, underneath the bottom of South Africa, through the Indian Ocean, through the states of Malacca, into the Pacific, and on to San Diego. So she became a Pacific carrier. In 1955, she was first deployed to blunt the perceived communist threat to invade Taiwan. As you know, Taiwan is still something that the Chinese now are still talking about invading. That first threat came in 1955, and the Midway was there for that next year. So I told you a little bit about the Midway. So here she is in her original configuration at the top, 1945. She's called a straight back carrier. Because of the advent and the creation of high-performance jet aircraft, they realized they needed to come up with a different way of launching and landing aircraft. So the angle flight deck came into part of what the Midway was transformed into. You see that 55 photograph replica there. You see that angle. The flight deck is angled. That's the way the jets land on the aircraft carrier. They come in at an angle such that if they miss their approach, they can go off the angle deck and go around and try again. So he's going to tell you about what happens when that goes right and when it goes wrong. And then finally, Midway went out of commission for 4 years. She was decommissioned. She went to Hunters Point, which is up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and they changed the flight deck. They made that angle, moved it an angle of 13 degrees offset. They added 3 elevators. You can see the elevators there. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah. Elevators. This is the number 1 elevator, number 2 elevator, number 3. The elevators have served the purpose of moving the airplanes up and down from the hangar bay where they were maintained and fixed and brought them up to the flight deck. So there is the Midway's configuration, and they also lengthened and improved the catapult system.
How do they move the planes up and down in the first?
Well, there's an elevator there.
So there's
a small elevator.
Just one.
Right there, too. There's that one, and then there's another one here. So, and then actually, there was a third one.
Okay.
In fact, I don't think that was an elevator, Steve. I think that was just a thing. And so right now, in the Midway, that section right there now is where our Battle of Midway Theater is. We're going to tell you about that as well. So that's about where that would have been, right about in here today. But that elevator was done away with. Okay. By the way, what that one, Steve? That flight deck is huge. You can't really appreciate it until you come up onto the island structure and look down at it. That's 4 acres of flight deck. Okay, go ahead. So, here's the difference between the Midway looking bow on. Right here is what these are called gun tubs. When aircraft carriers were built during World War II, they were bristling with anti-aircraft guns. Those were all done away with during the course of the change of naval aviation, the change in aircraft carriers. They didn't have guns on aircraft carriers very much. Steve's going to tell you about there's one exception to that now. We're closely in support, but basically the guns are done away with. The aircraft carriers today are defended by aircraft themselves and by other ships. Here's the Midway in the 1955 configuration with that 11-degree angle on the flight deck, on the landing area. This is called a hurricane top, totally enclosed now. During the Vietnam War, the Midway was a big participant in the Vietnam War. She was deployed to Vietnam 3 different times during the Vietnam War. She was certainly a workhorse. Typical of the aircraft that flew off the Midway was this is the F-4 Phantom up here and here, F-4 fighter bomber, and then the A-6 Intruder, which is an attack aircraft. Next, please. This is a place that the U.S. Navy hung out during Vietnam. Not many Americans have been here, this area of the South China Sea. This area right here called the Gulf of Tonkin is where the Navy aircraft carriers operated from to run strikes to North Vietnam and also in support of ground troops in South Vietnam. You might also notice these islands here that are in this little slide. Even today, the Chinese government claims all this area as their territorial waters. That's in total violation of international law, which allows you to have a 12-mile barrier off your coastline as your territorial waters. The Japanese like to claim the South China Sea now as their territorial waters, and they in fact are constructing military installations and artificial islands on these disputed territories. That doesn't bother the U.S. Navy because they still steam right through here all the time, just to let the Chinese know that that doesn't fly. Next, please. Because of the Vietnam War, the Defense Department and the Navy made a change. They decided to create something called the tip of the sword. Because it takes literally 3 weeks to get an aircraft carrier from San Diego to Japan, they decided to forward base the Midway at Yokosuka, Japan. This is Yokosuka. Yokosuka, by the way, is a port city about 30 miles south of Tokyo. And this is the Midway at the port there, at the port in Yokosuka. The Midway was home ported there for 18 years. She didn't come home. The people came and went, but the Midway remained there. It was overhauled there, operated, resupplied there at Yokosuka for 18 years. And in fact, many of the crew actually lived in Yokosuka, lived in the area, and built a bond with the Chinese people, the Japanese people that exist today. Next, please. Okay. My slides are sticking together. I'd say one of the Midway's finest hours was the sad day of April 1975 when the communists finally overran South Vietnam. And literally tens of thousands of South Vietnamese had to flee for their lives. Some of them came to the Midway. They came a lot of different ways. They came in boats, but most of them came in helicopters. During the course of 2 days, the Midway took on 5,000 Vietnamese refugees. Look at the looks on these people's faces, folks, as they came aboard the Midway that day off these helicopters, literally with the clothes on their back and maybe a suitcase. When I look at those faces, I see fear, I see apprehension, I see relief, and I also see gratitude. Okay, Steve, next. A couple of years later, this is a child right here who became a young man, became a 30-year-old man, and comes back to the Midway every year. This is him when he was a toddler getting off a helicopter. And in fact, April every year is kind of like Vietnam Day on the Midway. Hundreds of Vietnam Americans, many of them live in the Garden Grove area and in Orange County, and many in San Diego, come back to the Midway and celebrate the fact that they were liberated, and their first touch with America was on the Midway in 1975. So here's one of the backstories. Well, not quite yet. That's okay. This photograph was something that, go ahead, was taken, probably, I think this ran either Life magazine or Time magazine. Because of the proliferation of helicopters coming on board, there was nothing they could do with these, so they started pushing these helicopters overboard. Dozens of them were pushed overboard to make room for more helicopters to come on board. Next, please. So this is kind of an interesting little sidebar story. This is perhaps the Midway's finest hour. That same day, this little aircraft called a bird dog. A bird dog. It's like a Piper Cub, right? Single engine aircraft, no brakes. He flew down the Midway's over the flight deck and dropped a note onto the Midway's flight deck. The note, of course, blew off into the ocean. He came around again. This time he'd wrapped the note around his gun belt. Came down, landed on the Midway, they went down, they got the note. It's in Vietnamese. Took it up to the bridge. They had someone to interpret it. He said, have wife and 5 small children aboard, request permission to land on your aircraft carrier. They were going to tell him no, because he thought it was just a guy, we were not going to land an aircraft on the aircraft carrier with too many helicopters. So in a driving rainstorm, this little aircraft came aboard, made a perfect landing in the rain, and out tumbled the pilot and his wife and 5 small children. By the way, we have a replica of this bird dog aircraft hanging in the hangar bay today. You can come get it if you haven't seen it. Next time you're down there, really recommend you stop and see this. There's a great little diorama around underneath it that explains what happened that day. A lot of good photographs and actually some video of this plane landing. And as you well know, thousands of Vietnamese made the trek to San Diego and became San Diego citizens and American citizens throughout San Diego. Next word. A little out of order. There we go. Okay, Midway had 2 more assignments before she went out of business. You might remember Mount Pinatubo. That was the largest volcanic eruption in the 20th century, the worst volcanic eruption. The Navy rescued. Midway went from Japan to the Philippines on 1 day's notice and rescued approximately 1,900 U.S. civilians. And here they are on the hangar bay, on cots. And then finally, maybe her final assignment was this Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, 1990-91. That was her final assignment. She was the first carrier to serve exclusively in the Arabian Gulf. She flew aircraft from the Midway, flew hundreds of support missions during the Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And then finally the Midway was decommissioned right here in San Diego in 1994, ending her 47-year history. But the Midway lives on as a museum, and now Steve is going to tell you about that. One more over, Steve. I guess, where's my fans here? I'll have you point out. Okay. I want to point out something too. So here's the Midway, bird's eye view of the Midway today. That may look familiar to you. Look at the pier. The pier there is called Navy Pier. That decrepit pier has been there since about 1920, and it is decrepit. That is going to all be changed this year, and we're going to tell you all about that. So you don't understand that.
Okay. It took 11 long years to bring an aircraft carrier from Bremerton, Washington, get approvals, satisfy the Coastal Commission, satisfy the council, the city council, and all the other entities to bring the Port Authority, thank you. And finally, we got permission. We had to promise the Navy, we took control of the Midway, promised the Navy that we'd take care of it. We spend over $1 million a year just on the hull alone. So all these things, you go down there and drive by and see a lot of sockets, a lot of sheet metal work. We were trying to replace some of the panels that were busted out. One of the things I'd like to point out here, and this is, now let me go to the next slide here. Okay, up here on the point is a tribute to Bob Hope. And if you haven't been down there, you owe it to yourself to listen to it. There are speeches, there's songs, there's just a really nice something to benefit his life. And the sailor has been was a long story on that, but to make it really quick, we had a fiberglass model. Okay. The artist wanted it back. We kept installing, and finally said, heck with this. We're just going to make a new one out of brass and paint it. And we led the fundraiser. Midway was instrumental in getting enough funds to do it. So it is now permanently here in San Diego. Next slide. Okay, Brian's down here at we call the Blue Awning. If you want to meet somebody, this is where you have to go in and enter the ship. We have metal detectors. Our safety people, the people in the red hats and the red jackets are the people that will screen people to get in. We have plainclothes policemen, or we're actually armed, I don't want to say guards, but anyway, they're people that work for the Midway that blend into the crowd, both on the pier and also on the Midway itself. We have closed-circuit TVs over all the area. And if I had to park my car in San Diego, I'd do it in that lot right there. That's pretty safe. Next slide. Okay, it's Midway Magic. It's most visited ship worldwide, number 2 in California. And Time Magazine here is set as number 1. And by the way, we went over 1 million guests in 2023, so we're starting to get back to where we were. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, 23,000 visitor members, 72 million is the impact. We are not there yet. We started very slowly because of COVID. We went to the religious Catholic schools, the charter schools first, and finally now we're getting San Diego City schools to come back and do it. We have, we call it Midway University, and they actually, let's say we've got a 6th grade class that's doing a meteorology lecture or whatever. You will get in a real classroom with a real teacher, and then they go out, they serve them a snack, they go out and do a scavenger hunt over the museum. So it's really a nice program. 600,000 grants. We did not stop doing that just because it was COVID, and Brian has already covered the volunteer hours. Next slide. All right, this is our Tom Cruise look-alike. Brian's got here. This is to prove that their F-14s did land on the carrier. Now, we didn't have that aircraft like a regular squadron, but the 2 F-14s couldn't get back to their Enterprise ship. It was underneath the clouds, and there was no way. A storm was coming in, but the Midway was off in the clear. So they had to burn down their fuel because these guys are not really, they're too heavy for our arresting gear, when we stop. And then what we had to do the next day is light load fuel and make sure it was good weather. So they literally took off and went right into the land over on their other regular carrier. And as we'll see some jet blast deflectors. You can see these engines on the F-14 are too wide for our jet blast deflectors. We were trying to keep from having a man overboard drill up here. Next slide. All right. A careful note here. This is my old reserve squadron. This is an F-18 Hornet. It's a desert camouflage. And why do you think we have a red star on there? Because we're the bad guys. My squadron was called an aggressor unit, and we were aircraft of the third world, Russians, Chinese, or whatever. And that's why we have a red star on our airplanes. Next slide. The SPAD, we've got a little history here. It was during Vietnam. They had two of the A-1 SPADs supporting the Marines down in the weeds. This MiG-17, a MiG is a Chinese or a Russian-built jet, and we call them the bad guys, and we were simulated MiG guys. And he overshot the SPADs, and the two SPAD drivers had the wherewithal come up, blast them with their machine guns, and they saw him eject. So kill's a kill, right? So the guy was safe, he got out, but we got his airplane. Next slide. All right. We call a landing a trap. My wife calls it when she was in my airplane when I was flying for Delta. I landed with authority. I landed with a good Navy landing if I was a little cruncher. And this is what it is. It's coming in as a controlled crash. We have this F-14 is coming in at about 160 miles an hour. And as soon as it touches the main gear underneath their wings there, they go to full power. And they're caught in the trap and in the cable. And we've got some great slides. We also have, but it's more than that. We have a couple of videos. We show you what the bearing. How many saw Top Gun Maverick? Remember he snapped off his nose gear when he took off in that F-14. So they landed in what they call barricade. And it's a net-like thing that catches it like a web. And we have that E-2 Hawkeye that broke the cable. And we have the A-7 that was shot up and had to come in what they call no flap. And he was coming in at 200 miles an hour versus 130 miles an hour. And you'll see that was really whistling. And he snapped his nose gear, but they had enough foam over there. Next slide. All right, Brian's showing you how big that hook is. When we first opened the Midway, we had these arresting cables going all the way over to the engines on the side of the runway, on the aircraft here. And people were tripping on them. It's hard to get wheelchairs over them, so we painted where it goes. And the remnant here is a rolled steel, about an inch and 7/8 cable. You have 100 landings on them, and then they got to get rid of them. Or if they're damaged in that landing sequence there at all, they get inspected every time.
Steve, explain a little bit about how the tail hook works. It's built into the airplane.
Yes.
And that's what stops the aircraft.
Okay, this is, as you can see, is a lot bigger. You'll see my A4 here down the line here, and this is a huge tail hook compared to my airplane. And it's basically because you need to have something that will handle it. And this hook has got pressure on it, and that's part of the pre-flight. You want to make sure that hook will go down and stay down, because we don't want to have a hook skid. It bounces and the hook skid over it. And then you land it, and if you're in the right glide slope, you land about 5-10 feet before that cable that you want. And on the Midway, we had 3 cables. And this number 2 cable is the OK2 wire. That's the best, that's an A grade. If you got an OK pass, you got the 2 wire, that's the best grade you could get. And this airplane right here is on the center line, and grabbed it, and that's in pretty good shape.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
When one of these fighters takes off fully loaded with fuel and bombs, is it too heavy to land?
And initially, yes.
So
You got a jettison and everything. In the A4, I had one handle. It would clean everything out on my wing. If I had to come back around immediately,
Yeah,
I could get rid of everything with one pull. And the same thing, the F4, the F14, or whatever. Let's see, I had something else I wanted to add. Okay, this is it here. Did that answer your question?
Yes, sir, thanks.
T2 Buckeye. Moses and I flew this back in flight training. This used to be the primary jet trainer. We'd have to get 7 arrested landings before we could go to the advanced training in Kingsville, Texas, of all places. Anybody know where Kingsville is? 40 minutes inland from Corpus Christi, Texas. My wife and I spent 4 years there, and it says 4 the armpit of the world. But anyway, hope you're not from Kingsville. All right. My first landing on the carrier was in this aircraft right here. And what you do is you train. You've got a landing signal officer that grades every pass. You get approved, You go out in a 4-ship, and they're going to the boat. By the way, the brown shoe Airedales call it a boat. The ship drivers call it a ship. And we're going to pass that back and forth, and then you can see that. It's sort of a funny joke. Back to the elevator. Okay, so I'm coming in. We go out, and 3 students on the lead instructor, and you do a touch and go, 2 touch and goes, and the landing signal says drop your hook. So I drop my hook, and I'm flying that glide slope, working it, and I touch down, and I go to full power, and I'm eating the instrument down. I made one mistake. I forgot to lock my inertial reel. You know, in the car, you jerk on your seatbelt, it'll be inertial reel lock. Well, that's supposed to be locked anytime you land, because you're coming in, you're going to get 3 or 4 times your body weight, 3 or 4 G's when you do that controlled crash. So that was my colorful landing, and my feet went up on the rudder pedals, and I had 2 black streaks. Why I didn't blow the 2 main tires is beyond me. And the air boss, which we'll see where he is, was screaming at me, and he knew I was an ensign. He says, "Ensign, don't you ever do that fire." I said, "I'm done." Well, nobody's told me I'm out of there, so I got up and I got catapulted off and finished the qualification. Next slide. All right, this is an EA-6B. This is an electronic jammer. You notice here, if you look real closely, those are radar sights. They have missiles that will home in on the radar side and take them out. So that's something slightly different. Most of the aircraft, or if you have a big kill or whatever, they'll have the airplane on the side of the airplane. This is where the air boss hangs out. He was screaming at me. Next slide. Okay, we have what we call the island tour. Brian and I usually like to get there. It's sort of under construction right now. And this is the first stop. It's called Primary Flight Control. You'll never remember that name. Just think of this as a control tower, just like Lindbergh Field. You've got a commander, it's like a lieutenant colonel in both seats. I usually like to put the ladies over here and the gents over here. It seems to work out better in the afternoon when you put them in the boss's chair. Next slide. Okay, we're now in the second spot as the chart house, home of the navigation team. This is one of the best preserved, restored, I should say, places on the ship. The only thing it doesn't have are some very expensive stopwatch clocks, but that's a real sextant. We're not going to give you a celestial navigation course, but we'll give you the rudiments of it and show you. There are 3 charts here. We've got San Diego over here, we've got Subic Bay, Philippines over here, and we've got Yokosuka, Japan up there. Next slide. Looking back, we've got this GPS rudimentary, we've got electronic transmitters, some other devices. Next slide. All right, this is a catwalk from out of the chart house going into the bridge area. Next slide. All right, good photo op here. We have a 19-year-old sailor driving a 70,000-ton ship and can't see outside. So he's listening to one voice, and that's the con officer, whoever has the con. Next slide. And he's leaning on the engine order telegraph that tells the engine room what speed we're going to be going at, how many turns or revolutions of the propellers. Next slide. All right. By the way, we've added both to the trap reef and the cat reef, catapults. This is short for cat reef, or cat is short for catapult. And the shade area here helps quite a bit. Now, we have a computer-generated image here on this particular exhibit that shows you what is happening underneath the flight deck. So you get a visualization of what it shows what's happening on the top, and you're seeing the steam come out of the storage unit all the way up to the bow to actually catapulting off. We have cameras in the back of the airplane on the catapult shot, and also, next slide. Brian's up here in the front. This is a great history of San Diego, the history of naval, ships and aviation here in San Diego. All this stuff is for the museum. This is not here when it was an active duty ship. You can actually go walk out over the water and get some good pictures. We usually have a nuclear ship out here, comparing the nuclear ship, how big it was, tonnage and everything, to the Midway. Next slide. I had to put my airplane in. He said $4,300 and I have the hemorrhoids to prove it. This little airplane here, but we had nothing underneath the wing. When we were flying as a bad guy or a bandit or a bogey, these are aerodynamic slats and sometimes they would hang up and that would be colorful. But we used to have everything off and we also cleaned out here. This is the electronic countermeasures hump and we didn't have it working anyway. No radar, just an iron sight. So we were pretty basic. The big thing here, if you saw the first Top Gun movie, Jester was the instructor in the A4. We called it Mongoose A4 because they bolted their slats up. And that was quite a difference.
How fast would you go on that?
Well, when we would engage, we were looking at 550 knots, but that's about as fast as we
Well, even with the Delta, we wouldn't go supersonic?
No.
Okay.
No, we have no afterburner. It's partly because we got to have the air coming into the intakes there at subsonic. That's part of it. Those are not movable. Like in the F-14 and the F-18, those are movable, intakes.
Do you ever take your wife on that?
No, I wish she'd have to be in the military if she didn't want to do that. Next slide. All right. Jet Shop is our gift and souvenirs. We have everything there. You want to get your grandson or daughter a leather flight jacket. There. You want a shirt. You want movies. You want models. They have posters. In fact, this is the most popular poster that they sell back there. I had it mounted. It's sort of a little warped. I need to work on that. But it shows you the ship and everything. In fact, when Brian and I go to the schools, especially the first and second graders, we have them there. We let them try on my helmets and take pictures. I do wipe them out after each use. But we show them how we come across the back end and do the traffic. This is really a great place. You can hang out here for quite a while. Next slide. Okay, Cafe 41. How many people have been to the Cafe 41? This is fairly new. We've got our own people running the food service now, and the chef has some daily specials, and I like the hamburgers, cheeseburgers, so pretty good job. Next slide. All right. This is a comparison of the Gerald R. Ford, which is our newest $13 billion carrier, and it's got drones on it, and we should give you some of the comparisons. The Langley was CDN1, that was the old, you can see how small, this was the very first carrier. What a difference. They've got some, what they call electromagnetic aircraft launch system. It's sort of like roller coaster technology where they energize the panel out in front smoother because they've got drones on that don't have the beefed up landing gear that the aircraft have. So we've got a combination of F-35 Lightning IIs and F-18Es and Gs. And I pointed out some of this, it looks like R2-D2, remember Star Wars? That's a close-in weapon system. That throws a wall of lead. They've got it on all four corners of the aircraft here and a cruise missile that's coming into the ship.
The only anti-aircraft weapon.
That's right. Now they do have, I don't think they have Sparrows, but the Midway had some missiles that and then they had, they got the Seaways later. The only reason I know anything about that close-in weapon system is my reserve squadron, in addition to dogfighting, combat maneuvering, we would tow targets. And one of them was a target that was 20,000 feet behind me, that they would practice shooting that off, but I said, okay, the range is hot and I want to make sure I was over the ship. And they got their guns pointed way back there. And then when they usually shoot it off because they're really good, the radar there just locks it up. And I could feel the tension go, and then I'd want to break away because that's like a guillotine, the cable wire. So I'd snip it off, and I said, request flyby. That'd be the only time I could really get down to about 50 feet above the water, go right by the ship, and go home. So that was sort of fun.
What's CDN? What's the initials?
CVN is carrier and is nuclear. Midway was CV. We were a steamship, but that's a steamship. It's just that they use nuclear power, and we had this horrible NATO 76 stuff that was really. Boy, if you see some pictures on the Midway of people cleaning out the boilers, not a good job. I don't want that. Next slide. Okay, we're going down at the City at Sea. Now, this used to be a bomb elevator, and we converted it into what we call a bunny slope, which is a nice, comfortable stairways. We go downstairs. That is an SMJ. That was a trainer in World War II. My father-in-law flew those. He was a Marine airplane pilot, and he trained on that. And he flew Corsairs in World War II. I think he flew Panthers in the Korean War, and he was checked out in F-8 so that he didn't have to go over to Vietnam because he was a full bird colonel there and commanding officer of Camp Smith. Next slide. Okay, please don't eat any of the food. Okay, you see the SOS there. Well, this would even be worse than some of that. But anyway, this is one of 7 galleys, and it's pretty well restored down there. You get a good feel for what you do. Next slide. All right. Marine, why do we have Marines on board? Well, to protect sensitive materials like atomic weapons, and that's why this is a restricted area to keep out. And we have about 50 Marine detachment on the Midway, and they would be, if they had a small ship that they wanted to find out about, they said they would get an armed Marine contingent to go over there and board the ship to see if it was a good. The bad guys are on board. Next slide. Machine shop still works. So, you know, the thing that's so important on the Midway during the day, you're in the middle of the ocean, you know, it's hard to get parts. So if you need something immediately, they may have to manufacture it in the machine shop. These are very good lathes and everything else. Next slide. All right. How many roller coaster folks do I have in here? All right. My grandson, you're going to meet him. Next slide. There, that's my grandson who's graduated from Embry-Riddle. He's an aerospace engineer, and he's got orders to flight training in the Air Force. Anyway, that's his girlfriend. So they're for you. This is something you got to be hardcore for. You want to have a good stomach, or at least. What you do is you have one of you can fly, and you flip her over. And one uses the machine guns, and you're in a big dogfight, you're against a Zero, and you are actually flying the airplane. So this is pretty cool. Next slide. Okay, I want everybody to take a promise with me right now. You will go on this ride when you go to the Midway. What it is, it's a virtual reality headset. Your seat moves just enough so that it correlates with what you're doing. You're not actually flying it, but it's a ride. And you're in the front seat of an F-18 Hornet, which you're about to see next slide. Okay, that's what you're looking at, okay? You come in and you do in-flight refueling. That's the drogue, they call it, that's on the big back of the tanker. His call sign is Texaco, that's an apt name for it. This thing will be activated by the pilot, comes out in the airstream, because you want to be, this is obviously supersonic, you've got to get rid of all the drag you can. This is not an easy deal. I was on my last flight, and I wanted to be really smooth because the guy was videoing it. And I came in, and oh crap! And so I'm doing this. Finally, I just shoved it in, and it worked. Next slide. All right, audio tour has been around for a while, but it's certainly an improvement. You just hang it around your neck. The speaker is in. You don't have to plug in your headset or anything. And if you want, next slide. You just punch it on that, if you will, that, what do you call it, like a barcode. That will give you what you want to hear as far as that event or exhibit. The green gives you an expanded version of it. And only thing that I caution you is make sure you got the right language before you leave. Next slide. Okay, Battle of Midway Theater. Right here, this is a 14-minute video. It's on every half hour. I think 4:30 is the last show, right? 4:30, something like that. It's either 4 or 4:30. But the point is, it's about 14-minute video. It's an in-house production. We grab some Disney special effects because we have holographic projections. It really looks like these people are walking out on the stage. I mean, it's very, very well done. And I have not been able to get through it without having a little moisture in the eyes. It's a very good film. How many see it? Okay, what'd you think?
That was great.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
It sort of gives you nice warm fuzzy, I think. Next slide. Okay, these are some kiosks here that tell you about why Midway, why was that island so important? Why did the Japanese want it as much as we did? And it was a strategic location. The 2 aircraft that were involved. Next slide. All right, this is the forecastle area. This is where the chains, the anchor chains. This is a pretty dangerous area here. You've got to be a bosun's mate in here, and you got to know what you're doing. But it's also the biggest open area on the ship. They have church services, they have a captain's mass, they have promotions, retirements, and I believe that the restoration of this area here was one of the best on the ship. I mean, it just sparkles, it really does. We also have some rope, we have a couple of people that really know how to tie knots, and we also sell those knots down in the hangar. Next one. All right, little museum here. It says ship's water line. You are actually below the water line outside, so we tease the folks and say, you got to hold your breath when you go down. Okay. Shows you the different boards here. I try to avoid this area like a plague because I'm not an engineer, but we've got some guys that actually work there, work down in there. Next slide. Okay, Combat Information Center. All questions are directed to Brian, but he was the CIC watch officer. So if you got any questions, ask him. No, this is the heart and soul of the ship if it was attacked. You would have all the weapons systems here. It also is where the radar is for the people landing airplanes coming in. The final controller on a precision approach coming in, we call it a ground control approach. And all down here, and this is again, they will grab radars and make sure that we're not in danger. Next slide. All right, Midway volunteers, we have our safety folks. They're AED and CPR qualified. They also have a first aid kit. So if you need a Band-Aid, go see our safety folks. All right, next slide. Okay, now Brian's going to cover our newest endeavor. And you've got some other pictures here.
Steve's going to fire up the video that we're going to have for you. I'm going to tell you something about exciting that's happening at the Midway. Starting in about March, the Midway is going to transform Navy Pier, which I showed you previously, the decrepit 100-year-old pier, into something spectacular. It's a 4-year, $60 million project to create Freedom Park at Navy Pier. When it's complete, it's going to be 10 acres. It's going to be the largest veteran-themed park in the Pacific and the western part of the United States. This is museum talk. It's a walk-through, interpretive, thematic experience. I don't know what that is, and I don't think they know, but it's going to really be cool. It's going to reinforce the values of freedom, duty, sacrifice, honor, courage. It's going to be a walk-through type of park. There will even be a formal parade grounds for ceremonies and special events. So that is underway, will be actually underway, and the first project is to take down Building 11, which is the building now that you drive out and you come out onto the pier. That's going to come down. They're promising that the Midway is not going to close for one single day during this major project. We'll see about that.
How do they get the funding for it?
Aha! You can get on board for that. It's $60 million donated, largely from corporations. We've got some corporate partners, and they're going to be asking them to pony up for this. But there's ways you can donate $100 if you want. So they're going to invite the museum members, of course, all 22,000 of them, to contribute. And it's going to be something that you're going to be reading about and seeing about on television. Okay, Steve?
Just to set this up, I alluded to, yes?
Where are you going to park if they're going to do that?
Very good question. We're wondering about that ourselves. Well, if there's Manchester's building across the street there has underground parking, and we're hoping they will live up to their golf carts, moving people over to the Midway, especially as chronologically challenged docents.
Now they're building, if you haven't been down there on Harbor Drive, it's amazing how different it is than it was even 2 years ago. All kinds of, they call it the RAD, the Research and Development District. There are going to be hotels down there, underground parking, and so there's a lot of parking going in down there across from Midway. I'm gonna miss that parking lot.
Yeah, because
It's the way it is.
our parking, the staff parking is right along near the ship. I mean, it's,
Yeah, and it ain't gonna be cheap.
I'm sorry?
It ain't gonna be cheap.
I know, I'm sorry, folks, we have nothing to do with that part.
Maybe before we start your video, see if we can entertain any questions that you have. We'd love to entertain some questions. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have some tickets that I've been waiting to use. How long do I need to set aside time-wise to do a thorough tour?
That's a great question. I tell people if you really want to really get a feel, be prepared to spend 3 hours plus. Midway, looking at the Midway this way, vertically it's an 18-story building, and you can stop on every single floor deck, and you can learn something if you have the stamina and the interest of doing it. So if you're going to bring people from out of town, tell them we're going to be there for half a day. And they're going to wear you out because their legs and ankles and feet get tired walking on steel deck, I can tell you. So wear your best shoes and be prepared for a kind of a physical day.
Are there any elevators between decks?
Yes, great question. When the ship was built, of course, the elevators to move the airplanes. No elevators for people. Now, as a museum, we can get you from the pier up to the hangar bay level where you'll enter the ship, and then there's another elevator to take you up to the flight deck. So there's those. There's even an elevator to take you from the hangar bay down below decks. So it is largely wheelchair accessible with several exceptions, like the island, which is not. You've got to climb ladders to get up there, ladders or stairs. So if you've got people that are just can't do it, it's largely but not totally wheelchair accessible.
But, did you tell them about the elevator from the flight deck down?
I did.
Okay.
Hangar deck.
Hangar deck.
Hangar
Hangar deck down.
to below decks.
Yeah.
So you can see most of the ship, but not all of it, via wheelchair, and getting your places by elevator. When I get there in the morning, I challenge myself to make the 45-step walk from the hangar bay up to the flight deck. And when I get up there, I'm ready to go to work, because it really wakes you up to make that walk. More questions, please.
Can I just add on that, Brian, that we do have, at the end of the island, towards the front end of the ship, is a video of the 3 different areas and some other areas. So what I do, if someone doesn't feel like going up 43 stairs, 10, 13, 10, then you can see the video. Okay, and it's
The video of the island, explain the island stops.
okay, the chart, the control tower, primary flight control, the chart house, and the bridge. And that is all there, very well narrated and very well videoed. So that's available.
That's to make people feel better who are not going to make that climb. And people look at those ladders and they go,
And there it is, my wife has no ACL, and she just takes it easy, and she can go up pretty good. It's coming down with no ACL, that's the hard part.
question, sir.
Make up the flight deck of the 3 versions of it.
3 versions? Oh, yeah, the 3 configurations, yeah.
Yes.
Major changes. Yeah. What was your question, though?
Well, what made up?
What made the changes?
airplane?
Well, because of the jet aircraft. You think of a World War II movie, and you see that plane coming in straight down the deck. He's coming in at about 75 miles an hour, and he catches a tail hook and he stops. With a jet aircraft, you can't do that, because if you miss the hook, then you're going to go off the front of the plane and run into planes that are already parked up there. The flight deck is used to park airplanes, largely. So the angle deck was created, so you come in at an angle. So he's going to show you that on the video, what that looks like. So the aircraft here is going like this, but you land coming at about an 11, 13 degree angle. It's better to be seen visually, see that visually, than can be had.
My question really is how many aircraft? What is the makeup of the aircraft on the 3 different versions?
Well, that
changed
It
dramatically.
did. You went from all props to props and jets to all jets to, we still do Kerbal prop, the E-2 Hawkeyes, and one of the big dome on them.
Show me airplanes. Yeah. So here's, you see, airplanes. Obviously, the Midway is not launching airplanes right now. In this photograph, they're parked, they're in transit. That's F-4 Phantoms, there's the E-2 Hawkeyes, here's the A-6 Prowler, AE-6 Prowler. And so the airplanes are largely parked up there. So when that plane lands coming on the angle deck, they're directed over here onto the forward part of the flight deck to park. And they park them literally this far apart, the wingtips, after they're folded. Every space is critical. All the wings on all the aircraft, even the helicopters, the wings fold. The helicopter, the blades fold back. Every inch is spoken for on the flight deck.
If you want to know the configuration, you take the loop, just ask any of the docents or any of the people who are red hats.
Forward loop.
Yeah, forward loop, and it shows you 1946, 1956.
The number of aircraft decreased because the airplanes are bigger and they're jets, as opposed to the World War II aircraft, which are smaller and don't take as much space. That's the basic answer to that. So that forward loop will take you to the ready rooms, which is fascinating, because you'll see where the pilots were briefed and what that was like for them. And those are all like little mini museums at the Midway. The different aircraft had their own ready rooms. So that's a fun place to hang out.
Good question.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
What's the flight deck made out of?
Steel. Midway is the first 3 inches of steel. Midway is the first aircraft carrier built with a steel flight deck. Steel. In World War II, they were wood flight decks. Bombs go right through them. So that's one of the reasons the Midway has a steel flight deck. Yes, ma'am.
Were the Japanese carriers wooden decks as well?
Yes.
You know why?
No.
World War I, there was a limit to the tonnage, max tonnage, and the only way they got underneath that for a while
Was an agreement.
was an agreement, but the wooden flight deck. Then all of a sudden, the Japanese just said, screw that.
And then they went to metal?
Well, I don't
No,
think
they
so.
never went to
No,
metal.
this was.
In fact, the Battle of Midway, when those Japanese aircraft carriers were bombed, the bombs penetrated, went down to the hangar bay where all the aircraft and fuel was, and they exploded. And those ships sank, all 4 of them.
Basically made out of wicker.
Really, it was cheap. It was thin wood, yeah.
When did we get metal decks on our carriers?
Midway,
First one. Midway was the first aircraft carrier.
Yeah,
No World War II aircraft carriers with metal decks.
Yeah.
That was a major innovation that was made when they built the Midway. And all the subsequent aircraft carriers, of course, also have metal flight decks.
So Midway was
Steel.
the first.
Yes.
Midway was the first, yeah.
And you got 3 inches of steel, hangar decks, 2 inches of steel. The second deck is 2 inches of steel. So what that is protecting the magazines where you store all the stuff. And especially when we had atomic bombs on the Midway during the Korean War. And that's why it never went to Korea. They put it sailing around the Mediterranean because that was the counterbalance. They thought maybe it was a fake, it was a feint, and that the Chinese and the whatever were going to be invading Europe. And that was, Korea was a red herring. Does that make sense?
But it wasn't red.
No, it wasn't. But I'm just saying, the reason but they had the Midway there with the nuclear capability to go drop a nuclear bomb or atomic bomb, you know.
Thank you, folks, and we'd be happy to. Vince says we got to give the museum back